The earth trembled beneath her fury. Karen, her face twisted in a mask of righteous anger, slammed a stack of papers onto my porch table, nearly shattering the aged wood. "They're coming," she shrieked, her voice cracking with a hysteria that sent chills down my spine. 100 of them, and it's all your fault." Before I could even utter a word, she jabbed a manicured finger, adorned with an enormous fox diamond ring, towards the field bordering my property. Her voice, a shrill siren cutting through the peaceful morning air, continued, "You and your blasted wildflowers. Your natural landscape is an open invitation to these hippies. I stared at the papers, my stomach plummeting to the earth alongside the last vestiges of my peaceful morning. Permits. Camping permits. Issued by the county. For my land. But listing Karen's address as the applicant. My gaze shot up to meet hers, a maelstrom of confusion swirling in my gut. "Karen, this is my property. You can't." "Oh, but I can," she interrupted, a smug smirk stretching across her Botox-frozen face. According to HOA bylaw 27.8 subsection C, paragraph 4, any land bordering a member's property falls under shared community space regulations if deemed aesthetically displeasing by a majority vote. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in before delivering the final blow. "And guess what, honey? Yesterday, your precious wildflowers won us the Most Attractive Nuisance Award." Before my shock could morph into coherent thought, the rumble of an engine shattered the tense silence. A beat-up RV, adorned with peace signs and dreamcatcher decals, crawled into view, its occupants cheering as if they'd just stumbled upon paradise. Panic surged through me. This was bad, really bad. Especially considering the 3 Doberman pinschers currently napping on the back porch, blissfully unaware of the impending chaos. As if sensing the shift in the air, the largest of the dogs, Brutus, a hulking beast with a bark that could rival a lion's roar, stirred, his ears perking up. His dark eyes, glinting with a primal intelligence, landed on the approaching RV. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest. Oh God, this was about to get ugly. "They're early," Karen screeched, her carefully constructed composure cracking like a dropped egg. "The permits clearly state arrival time is noon. It's barely past 10. This is an outrage." She fumbled for her phone, her voice a strangled whisper. "I'm calling the HOA president this instant, and the police, and the National Guard. They'll all see how right I am." I barely registered her words. My attention was laser-focused on Brutus. He had risen to his full, terrifying height, a low growl rumbling in his chest like distant thunder. Beside him, his equally imposing companions, Caesar and Luna, snapped awake, their ears flattened, teeth bared in menacing grins. Fear, primal and instinctive, pulsed through my veins. This was no longer about wildflowers or HOA bylaws. This was about to escalate into something much, much worse. The RV shuddered to a stop, its arrival heralded by the excited yelps of a dozen or so dogs inside. The passenger door swung open, and a young woman, her face lit with an almost beatific smile, stepped out. She was followed by a man strumming a ukulele, and then a small, yapping fluffball that I vaguely recognized as a Bacon Fries. "Welcome, welcome," the woman called out, her voice echoing across the field. "We're so excited to be here. This place is just magical." The words seemed to snap Karen out of her frenzy. "Magical," she shrieked, her voice hitting a new octave. "This is a disaster waiting to happen. This land is private property. You have no right to be here." But her words were lost in the cacophony. More vehicles were arriving, a motley collection of vans, buses, and even a converted school bus painted with psychedelic swirls. People poured out, laughing, chattering, and completely oblivious to the storm brewing on my porch. And then it happened. Brutus, fueled by I don't know what primal instinct, let out a bark that could curdle milk. It was a primal scream, a declaration of war that echoed across the field, silencing the chatter and bringing the arriving campers to a stunned halt. Every dog on the property, including the fluffy Bacon, added their voices to the chorus, transforming the peaceful morning into a canine symphony of impending doom. The color drained from the young woman's face as she finally seemed to notice the three massive dogs flanking me on the porch. Her eyes widened, her smile vanishing like a soap bubble in a hurricane. The ukulele fell silent. "Oh dear," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the barking. "This isn't good." Karen, true to her nature, seemed to interpret the escalating canine chorus as a personal victory fanfare. "Yes, be afraid," she screeched, her voice a triumphant cackle. "These are highly trained attack dogs. You're trespassing. Leave now or face the consequences." Her moment of glory, however, was short-lived. From the throng of bewildered campers, a new figure emerged. A man, built like a refrigerator with legs, his arms covered in intricate tattoos, strode towards us. He had a pit bull terrier by his side, a compact ball of muscle that moved with an almost unnerving silence. The man's face was impassive, unreadable, but the air around him crackled with a palpable tension. Even Brutus seemed to sense a shift in the dynamic, his bark losing some of its bluster as the newcomer approached. He shifted nervously from paw to paw, his usual confidence seemingly dimmed by the silent power emanating from the tattooed man. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" The man finally spoke, his voice surprisingly soft, almost gentle. But there was a steel undercurrent that sent chills down my spine. "Problem?" Karen practically shrieked, her carefully manicured facade crumbling under the pressure of the confrontation. "Problem? They're trespassing. On private property. With their riffraff dogs." The man's gaze swept over the assembled campers, lingering momentarily on the ukulele player, who offered a nervous smile and a small wave. When he spoke again, his voice was laced with an amused irony. "Well, ma'am, seems like we got ourselves a misunderstanding. See, we got these permits here, signed and stamped by the county, granting us permission to camp on this here land." He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, identical to the ones Karen had shown me earlier, and waved it nonchalantly in the air. "So, unless you've got a problem with the county of Jackson, I suggest you take your complaints elsewhere." Karen opened her mouth, then closed it, sputtering like an engine running out of fuel. Her eyes darted between the permit, the imposing man, and the increasingly restless campers, a flicker of uncertainty momentarily marring her carefully curated facade. But before either she or the man could speak again, a new sound cut through the tense standoff. A low, rumbling growl, deeper and more menacing than any I'd heard before. It wasn't coming from Brutus. It was coming from beneath the porch. The growl escalated into a deep, guttural bark that reverberated through the very ground we stood on. The porch vibrated, and I saw Karen's eyes widen, a flicker of genuine fear momentarily erasing her haughty demeanor. From beneath the floorboards, a dark, furry missile shot out. It wasn't one of my dogs. This dog was bigger, broader, a monstrous black shape that moved with a speed and agility that defied its size. A low, rumbling growl emanated from its chest, a primal sound that sent shivers down my spine and caused the hair on the back of my neck to stand on end. Even Brutus, Caesar, and Luna, normally fearless protectors, shrank back at the sight of the newcomer. They whined, tails tucked, and for the first time since I'd known them, seemed utterly outmatched. The tattooed man, however, didn't flinch. He watched the enormous dog with an unnervingly calm expression, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. The newcomer, a beast of a dog that could have been part wolf, part bear, stopped in front of me, its massive head coming up to my waist. It sniffed at me, its hot, rank breath washing over me, then nudged my hand with its nose, demanding to be petted. Bear, a new voice, this one gruff and laced with amusement, cut through the tense silence. A wiry older man, his face weathered by time and experience, emerged from beneath the porch, dusting off his overalls. "Seems like you've made a new friend." His eyes twinkled with a mischievous glint as he surveyed the stunned faces around him. "Dad," I stammered, my voice catching in my throat. My father, a man who valued solitude above all else and hadn't visited in over a decade, had chosen this, of all moments, to reappear. He ignored me, his attention focused on the tableau playing out before him. His gaze swept over the assembled campers, lingering momentarily on the tattooed man and his equally imposing dog. A slow smile spread across his face. "Well now," he drawled, his voice booming across the silent crowd. "This seems like a right fine gathering we got here." He clapped his hands together, the sound like a gunshot in the stillness. "How about we forget this nonsense and have ourselves a proper welcome party? My treat." Karen, her face a mask of outrage and confusion, sputtered, But, the permits, the bylaws, the—" My father simply chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to shake the ground beneath us. "Permits?" he boomed, wrapping an arm around my shoulders and giving me a squeeze that felt suspiciously like a threat. "Seems like my little girl forgot to mention the most important rule of all." He winked at the tattooed man. "Family first." A wave of uneasy murmurs rippled through the gathered campers. Karen, her carefully constructed world tilting on its axis, sputtered, "Family? What are you talking about? This is preposterous." My father, ignoring her completely, turned his attention to the tattooed man. "You must be Jake," he boomed, extending a hand the size of a bare paw. "Heard whispers of you from a friend of a friend. Said you were the one to talk to about situations like this." Jake, a flicker of amusement dancing in his eyes, clasped my father's hand in a grip that could probably crush coal into diamonds. "Word travels fast, I see." His gaze shifted to me, then back to my father. Didn't know old Abe had himself a daughter, let alone one who attracted this much excitement. "Oh, it's not me they're interested in," I interjected, shooting a pointed look at Karen, who was now furiously typing on her phone. "It's the wildflowers." The absurdity of the situation, the sheer improbability of it all, finally broke through the tension. Laughter, hesitant at first, then growing in volume, erupted from the campers. Even Jake cracked a smile, shaking his head slowly. "Wildflowers, huh?" My father chuckled, his eyes twinkling. "Always did like 'em. Brings in the butterflies, you know." He winked at me, then turned back to the crowd, his arms spread wide in a gesture of open invitation. "Well, folks, seems like the party's at my place. We got plenty of space, plenty of food, and more importantly," he paused, his eyes twinkling with mischief, "plenty of stories to tell." The campers, sensing a sudden shift in power dynamics, readily joined in the merriment. Ukuleles were retrieved, drums were pounded, and within minutes, the air was filled with the sounds of laughter and music. Even Bear, my father's imposing dog, seemed to catch the festive spirit, bounding through the throng of people, tail wagging, eliciting delighted shrieks and playful pats. Only Karen remained immune to the infectious joy. Her face, frozen in a mask of indignant fury, was a stark contrast to the joyous scene unfolding around her. She jabbed a finger in my direction, her voice trembling with rage. "This isn't over. You'll regret this. I'll... But whatever threat she was about to unleash was cut short by the arrival of a beat-up ice cream truck, its tinny speakers blasting out a jaunty rendition of Pop Goes the Weasel. The campers, their attention diverted, cheered and rushed towards the promise of frozen treats. My father, a smug smile playing on his lips, slung an arm around my shoulders. "Don't you worry about her, kiddo," he whispered, his voice a low rumble in my ear. "Some folks, they just can't stand the sight of others having a good time. But we'll show them, won't we? We'll show them what happens when you try to mess with family." Karen, momentarily forgotten in the excitement, stood frozen, her face a mask of outrage. Her phone, clutched in a death grip, slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the wooden porch with a pathetic thud. No one, however, paid her any mind. The campers, lured by the promise of sugary treats, swarmed the ice cream truck, their earlier apprehension replaced by a childlike eagerness. My father, his arms still draped around my shoulders, chuckled, his chest rumbling like a distant earthquake. "Looks like Karen's lost her audience," he whispered, his voice a low rumble in my ear. "Time to show her what happens when you try to control everything." He squeezed my shoulder, a silent signal, then strode towards the ice cream truck, his gait surprisingly sprightly for a man who seemed older than time itself. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wad of cash that would choke a horse. "Free ice cream for everyone," he boomed, holding up the money for all to see. "Today, we celebrate." The cheers that erupted from the campers were deafening. Karen, her face contorted with a mixture of fury and disbelief, seemed to shrink in on herself, her carefully constructed facade crumbling like a poorly built sandcastle. A hand on my arm startled me. I turned to see Jake, his expression surprisingly gentle. "Your old man," he said, his voice barely audible above the cacophony. "He's something else." I could only nod, a helpless laugh escaping my lips. My father, a man who valued solitude and silence above all else, had somehow managed to transform my quiet corner of the world into a full-blown festival. And truth be told, a part of me, a part I didn't even know existed, reveled in the chaos. The afternoon passed in a blur of laughter, music, and the sweet, sticky aroma of melting ice cream. Campers, their initial apprehension long forgotten, mingled with my father's friends, a motley crew of bikers, artists, and free spirits who seemed to materialize out of thin air. Brutus, Caesar, and Luna, initially wary of the newcomers, succumbed to the infectious joy, their tails wagging furiously as they weaved through the crowd, accepting belly rubs and ear scratches with equal enthusiasm. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the field, my father, a mischievous glint in his eye, gathered everyone's attention. He held up a hand, silencing the chatter. "All right, folks," he announced, his voice booming across the now silent crowd. "Show's about to begin." He gestured towards the tree line bordering my property, and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. From the depths of the woods, bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun, emerged a giraffe. Not just any giraffe, either. This majestic creature, its impossibly long neck stretching towards the heavens, was adorned with a crown of glowing flowers, its coat painted with intricate patterns that shimmered in the fading light. It moved with an ethereal grace, its hooves barely seeming to touch the ground as it navigated the field towards the stunned crowd. A collective gasp rippled through the campers, followed by a stunned silence. Even Karen, her face a mask of bewildered fury, seemed to have lost the ability to speak. The only sound, aside from the gentle strumming of a distant ukulele, was the soft crunch of grass beneath the giraffe's hooves. "Meet Genevieve," my father announced, his voice laced with pride. He stepped aside, allowing the magnificent creature to approach. Genevieve, with a gentleness that belied her size, lowered her head, nuzzling my father's shoulder. He chuckled, scratching her behind the ears. "She's a bit shy, but she warms up quick." The campers, finally breaking free from their collective stupor, erupted in a cacophony of gasps, whispers, and frantic shutter clicks. A young girl, her face alight with wonder, tentatively reached out a hand, and Genevieve, with a gentle grace that belied her size, lowered her head, allowing the girl to stroke her velvety nose. A wave of warmth, a feeling of pure joy, washed over me. My father, the master of the unexpected, had done it again. He had taken a situation teetering on the brink of disaster and transformed it into something magical, something unforgettable. As the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky, casting a soft glow on the scene, the campers gathered around Genevieve, their earlier apprehension long forgotten. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter, the strumming of guitars, and the soft murmur of voices sharing stories. Even Brutus, Caesar, and Luna, their initial wariness long forgotten, had joined the festivities, playfully nudging Genevieve's legs, their tails wagging furiously. Only Karen remained apart, her body rigid, her face a mask of simmering resentment. She stood alone on the edge of the crowd, a solitary figure enveloped in a cloud of her own making. Her eyes, narrowed in fury, darted from my father to the campers to Genevieve, her mind clearly struggling to comprehend, let alone accept, the unfolding reality. As I watched her, a strange sense of pity washed over me. How sad, I thought, to be so consumed by anger, so determined to control every aspect of your existence, that you miss out on the simple joys life has to offer. How lonely it must be to live in a world devoid of wonder, a world where giraffes with flower crowns don't exist. My father, sensing a shift in my demeanor, squeezed my hand. "Don't waste your time on her," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the gentle murmur of the crowd. "Some people are determined to be miserable, no matter what. Let them. We're going to have ourselves a real good time." He was right, of course. As the night deepened, the field transformed into a kaleidoscope of light and laughter. A bonfire blazed merrily, casting dancing shadows against the tree line. The campers, their initial apprehension long forgotten, danced and sang, their voices blending with the strumming of guitars and the rhythmic beat of a makeshift drum circle. Genevieve, the giraffe with the flower crown, had become the undisputed queen of the party, her gentle nature and ethereal grace captivating everyone present. Even I, usually content in my own company, found myself swept up in the infectious joy. I danced with Jake, his gruff exterior melting away to reveal a surprisingly gentle soul. I shared stories with the campers, their faces illuminated by the flickering firelight. I even caught my father watching me, a rare smile gracing his weathered features. Karen, however, remained a solitary figure, a dark cloud hovering on the periphery of the light. She paced back and forth, her phone plastered to her ear, her voice a shrill, frantic counterpoint to the joyous symphony unfolding around her. She called the HOA president, the police, even, I overheard her claim, the governor's office. But on this night, under the watchful gaze of a flower-crowned giraffe and the soft glow of 1,000 stars, her complaints seemed to fall on deaf ears. The universe, it seemed, was on our side. As the first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky with hues of pink and orange, signaling the end of our improbable night, a strange peace settled over me. I knew, deep down, that this wasn't the end of my dealings with Karen. The HOA, after all, was nothing if not persistent. But for now, as the last of the campers packed up their belongings, their faces aglow with the memory of a magical night, I allowed myself to savor the moment. I had faced my fears, confronted my nemesis, and emerged victorious, surrounded by friends, family, and the comforting presence of a very large giraffe. Life, I realized, was full of surprises, and sometimes the most unexpected events, the ones that initially filled you with dread, turned out to be the most beautiful, the most transformative. As the last of the campers drove away, their vehicles adorned with hastily crafted "Thank you, Genevieve" signs, I turned to my father, a question lingering in my eyes. He smiled, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Don't worry, kiddo," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "The adventure's just beginning." And with a wink and a wave, he disappeared into the tree line, leaving me alone, with a field full of memories and the lingering scent of wildflowers, to face whatever came next.